Why do you understand Vietnamese but can't speak it? Like, why? I know all too well how this feels because although my parents are Vietnamese, I was born and raised in Germany. So naturally, when I was in school or in uni or even with my friends, I would always speak to them in German. The only time I probably spoke in broken Vietnamese was to my parents at home. But eventually, I wanted to change that because I was not able to communicate with my grandparents or my family in Vietnam. So I made it my goal to become fluent in Vietnamese. So in this video, I'm going to share with you in the first part why we understand Vietnamese but can't really speak it, and in the second part how we can improve our speaking skills drastically so that people think we're natives or at least close to the native level. So let's get started. In my opinion, there are mainly three reasons why we understand Vietnamese more than we're able to speak, especially as immigrant children who grew up in Western countries. Reason number one, speaking and listening require two completely different skill sets. One is active and the other one is passive. I already talked about this topic of output and input a lot on my channel, but basically when you talk, you need a lot of different skills combined at one. You need to extract words from your brain, translate them within your brain, send them to your mouth, and then coordinate your mouth and tongue to form the words. And especially Vietnamese is such a different language from the Western languages like English or German in my case. And since Viet is a tonal language, if you make a slight shift in a pronunciation, it might mean a completely different word. For example, chai means vegetarian, chai means bottle, and chai means burnt. And if you just saw, what the fuck, David, everything sounded exactly the same, you're kind of right. I totally get where you come from, because in the beginning I couldn't tell the difference either. But I promise, the more you practice, over time you'll definitely hear the differences in this tonal kind of language. Also, don't worry, I'm gonna give you some tips at the end of this video to actually practice so that you can accelerate your progress a lot faster. Now, as I mentioned, when you talk, you have to do way more of the thinking yourself. When you just listen to other people talking, they do the thinking for you, if that makes sense. Secondly, you simply lack practice, as cheesy as it sounds. Because chances are, if you're like me, your Asian parents never really taught you how to speak. They never really sat down with you and went over the grammar with you. Oftentimes, if you're Vietnamese who grew up in a Western country, there are basically two options how you got immersed with Vietnamese. Either your parents speak to you in Vietnamese, but because your Vietnamese is so broken, you kind of answer in a mixture between the Western language and Viet. Or your parents don't want you to speak Vietnamese at all because they think it's better for you to speak the native language of that country. So they speak to you in the Western language and you respond to them in the Western language. In my particular case, my mom was really good in German. So a lot of times I was actually talking to my mom solely in German without using Vietnamese at all. And that would have been a huge problem. Luckily for me though, my dad barely speaks any German, so I was forced to speak to him in Vietnamese. And that's how I kind of practice Vietnamese with my dad. So don't judge yourself if you have a hard time speaking because it's just natural. You simply like to practice. It's exactly the same with how you learn to ride a bike. When you were young and you started to learn how to ride a bike, you fell down a bunch of times, but you got up again and again and again. And over time, you eventually were able to master riding the bike. The same goes for languages. You will make a lot of mistakes, and although it might feel embarrassing, you have to go through that. Actually, I think it's better for you to aim for making mistakes. The only reason why we hate mistakes and why we tend to avoid mistakes is because of our education system. Because in school, if you made a lot of mistakes, you're likely to get an F. And if you have Asian parents, you'll get a belt because you got an F and not an A+. I'm kidding, my parents were actually pretty nice. In real life, the people who succeed are the ones who make the most mistakes and actually learn from the mistakes. And over time, I promise, the more mistakes you make, the more you learn from them, you'll get more confident because confidence comes from competence. Pick anything you're really good at right now. Chances are you're really confident in that field. Might be a sport or any other skill because you know deep down inside that you put in the reps and you're really good at it in comparison to the average person. And at some point, the cool thing that you will notice is that you'll start to think in a targeted language. For example, right now when I speak in English is my third language, I don't think in German and then translate to English. I actually think in English. The same goes for Vietnamese or any other language that I mastered. And reason number three is that online materials or apps like Duolingo are a huge waste of time in my opinion. I used to waste so many hours on Duolingo thinking that I would make progress, but honestly, even after a year of using Duolingo, I was nowhere near being fluent in Vietnamese. Because the entire focus is on learning vocabulary as well as grammatical structures out of practical context. The huge problem I have with apps like Duolingo is that oftentimes they teach you random ass words that you don't really need. For example, I remembered the word planting a tree or something. Like, let's be real, if I'm traveling to Vietnam, is there a possibility I will use planting a tree? It's literally like zero. Let me give you a hint, never. Like, when would I use this fucking word? Also, the strict focus on just pumping vocabulary and grammar into your head feels super boring. It feels like you're back in school. And I think that's why so many people eventually quit. They don't see the results, it's boring as hell, and they ask themselves, why do I have to learn this word? Alright, now that we know the reasons, let's get to the juicy part. The ultimate goal for us is to communicate in Vietnamese, like a native speaker or, as I mentioned, close. I'll give give you a step-by-step guide that I followed back then in the past completely for free, okay? That you can just follow and copy so that you don't make the same mistakes that I did. The first option we're going to talk about is the most effective and fastest way for you to acquire the Vietnamese language, in my opinion. And that is investing in a professional tutor. Because let's be real, our immigrant parents are probably way too busy to sit down and teach us Vietnamese, and also it's very unlikely that I can just always fly to Vietnam and take some courses there or something like that. But don't worry, if you don't have the money or you don't want to invest in a tutor, I have a second budget option for you that you can literally start from the comfort of your own room for free today. So I found the best way to be immersed in Vietnamese and actually use Vietnamese on a daily basis and with practical context is by having a professional tutor, a native speaker. And I personally find my tutors on Fiverr, who are also kindly sponsoring today's video. Fiverr is the most versatile website I know. You can literally find anything on there, from video editing to setting up a website or finding language tutors for literally any language. As I mentioned, I used their Vietnamese tutors in the past, and even now that I'm mastering Korean, I'm paying for Korean language tutors on Fiverr as well. I also linked down below my Vietnamese tutors from the past so you can literally book a lesson with them as well. And to make this even better, you can use my discount code GOATED to save some money for your first Vietnamese class on Fiverr. I feel like the biggest advantage of working with a tutor is that they literally have a curriculum for you. So you don't have to do all the research, find the materials online, and can simply focus on speaking and acquiring the language naturally. Also, pro tip, if you have a tutor, discuss your goals from the beginning. I literally told my tutor, yo, I want to become fluent in Vietnamese within 6 months. So we focused heavily on speaking. Basically, the first 30 minutes was new input like grammar or vocabulary, and the second half of the class was mainly speaking. Let me actually show you a short clip of our lesson and the tutor.
Anh nói tiếng Việt rất rõ luôn. Em tưởng là anh đi vào bên này xong rồi sang kia. Đầu tiên thì em có một cái roadmap như vậy. Cho một học sinh mới thì thường là em sẽ cho họ một cái plan trong 3 tháng. Mình cũng sẽ có các cái file nghe, có các cái handout, ví dụ.
Ok.
Ở đây thì em cũng tập trung nhiều nhất là vào kỹ năng nghe và kỹ năng nói.
Em có những điều khuyên cho người nước ngoài mà thích học tiếng Việt để người ta học tiếng Việt nhanh hơn đó.
Rồi thì trước hết là điều quan trọng giọng miền Bắc hay miền Nam. Bởi vì miền Bắc với miền Nam thì mình sẽ chênh nhau rất là nhiều yếu tố. Ở ngoài miền Bắc thì mình có 6 thanh, có nghĩa là mình có đầy đủ tất cả các thanh. Nhưng mà ở miền Nam thì họ gộp chung cái dấu hỏi và dấu ngã. Chung ở miền Nam thì cái gì cũng sẽ đơn giản. Nhưng mà miền Bắc thì mình có là thịt lợn, nhưng mà cho miền Nam thì dùng là thịt heo. Tiếp theo cách phát âm của các cái vần a, á, ớ có thể là dễ, cái bảng chữ cái có thể là dễ, tuy nhiên khi mà mình ghép nó lại thì nó lại khác hoàn toàn với tiếng Anh. Và đa phần những người mà bỏ qua hai cái phần này thì họ gặp từ nào nó cũng sẽ giống nhau.
Miền Bắc hay là miền Nam, cái nào là cái accent mà đúng nhỉ? Từ ngày xưa rồi.
Ở miền Bắc, tại vì ngày xưa lãnh thổ Việt Nam là chỉ có một cái phần miền Bắc, cái phần phía Bắc và giáp với Trung Quốc thôi, nên là đa phần tất cả các từ vựng mà ở trong sách giáo khoa tiếng Việt là đều là giọng miền Bắc hết. Nên là nếu mà mình muốn học một cái thứ tiếng gọi là standard, là chuẩn mực thì mình nên học giọng miền Bắc. Alright, now in case you don't have the budget to hire a tutor, don't worry, I have an option for you. These are the exact exercises I do by myself without a tutor whenever I try to acquire language by myself. Number one is a classic in the language learning space, and it's called shadowing. Pick any Vietnamese content creator you enjoy watching. Just make sure that you obviously pick the accent you want to learn. In case you didn't know, in Vietnam we mainly have 3 accents, okay? The northern accent, the southern accent, and the middle accent. And the middle accent sounds like a complete new language in my opinion. I personally learned the Hanoi accent because my parents are from that region. Once you have your favorite Vietnamese creator, mimic exactly how they speak, their tonality, their pronunciation. Turn on the subtitles and read along. This method is really good for beginners to practice pronunciation and basic sentence structures, as well as learning new vocabulary. Because whenever you don't understand something, you can simply pause and rewind the video. And over time, your tongue will also get more familiar with forming the tones and the pronunciation. Number 2 is my favorite exercise, which I call the blind friend. And this exercise is slightly harder than the first exercise. Simply imagine you have a blind friend, and in my case, I imagine she's a hot ABG called Vivian Nguyen who loves boba. David, focus. And as she is blind, she can't see what's going on in her surroundings. So you, as a good friend, you have to describe to her what's going on. As a beginner, I would start to name and label things that are in your surroundings and just simply use the Vietnamese words for that. Let me show you how it's done. Chào em khỏe không? Đây là quyển sách, đây là đồng hồ, và anh là bạn trai của em. Anh yêu em. Focus, David, focus. Anyhow, if you want to make this exercise harder, you can talk to her like an actual friend. So you can talk about your feelings, you can talk about your day. And the reason why this exercise is slightly harder than the first one is that now you actually have to come up with the words and the sentence structures and the grammar yourself. Whereas in the first exercise, you simply copy what the creator was saying. Oh, and another thing I did back then was record myself with my phone. I know it's super cringe to listen to your own voice, but get over your fucking insecurities, okay? You have to get fluent so you can take Vivian out on a date. The cool thing about recording yourself is that you will see crystal clear what you have to work on.
on, or what words you struggled with grammar structures you struggled with. And if you paid for a tutor, you can literally send them over your recordings and they will give you good feedback on specific things. Okay, ultimately, I want to give you some pro tips that I wish I knew when I first started. Number one is try to avoid switching back to your native language. And I honestly am very guilty of this. Back then, whenever I didn't know a specific word, I literally went back to English or German. But that hindered my progress like crazy. Because if you force yourself to speak solely in Vietnamese, your brain will be forced to come up with ways to paraphrase what you're trying to say. Worst case, literally use your gestures, okay? And the other person will get the point from the context. And over time, you'll literally be able to express your thoughts, at least in a very simple way, and can paraphrase things. It makes you more flexible. Number two is to reflect after every conversation you have with a tutor or a native speaker, or just when you record yourself. Think about what were the words that I really struggled with? What was the grammar that I wanted to express but couldn't? And then simply be curious and look that up. I think curiosity is the key to mastering any new language. Because if you're naturally curious, like a baby would learn a new language, you will never lose motivation and you'll pick up things out of your free will over time. I genuinely hope this video helped you out in your Vietnamese language journey. And if you want to master Vietnamese the quickest way, definitely check out the Vietnamese tutors I linked down below.